What's up, everyone? This is Pastor Sam,
And this is Danny.
and together,
We are exploring
relationship.
relationships. But not only that, though, today we have a special guest for an area of expertise that we are no experts in.
No, I am not. You're right about that. And the topic today is what?
It's parenting. And we
Parent.
have
Oh, wait a second. You're a brand new parent. You're
I
not
am a
good
brand
at it.
new
Why are you
parent.
having babies if you're not a good parent?
We're going to talk about that later. but first, let's meet our guest today. Dan Vroegop. Dan, introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. Dan Vroegop. I'm a licensed professional counselor here in the Delaware area. I've been attending DCC for seems like forever, 22, 23 years, something like that now. So
Yeah, a fun fact.
Dan outdates us.
He does. Well, actually, Dan was the one. I think was the first person I talked to at DCC. He was on my interview process, and he interviewed me on the process. See, you should blame him for bringing me over here.
thankfully, it was a committee decision.
I was going to say, if we blame him, we put blame too, because I was on that committee.
But yeah, I would never forget that call. I was in my house and I told Laura, like, oh, it's from Delaware Church. He's Dan. I gotta go upstairs. I went to the bedroom, and had a conversation with Dan. It was an intimate conversation.
Yeah.
Okay, we're making him uncomfortable right now. Yeah, Dan has now to more serious note. Dan has partnered with me in the last, I don't know, 2-3 years.
About 3 years,
yeah. On just caring for parents, for families, for kids. Has a great gift in just understanding the heart of kids and grown-ups too, but he's really good in make sure that kids that get their voice heard and get their mind reoriented a little bit in order to live healthier life, right?
Yeah, so true. Yeah, I really do enjoy, I think some of my youngest clients have been 4 and 5 years old all the way up to 18 and all the ages in between. So they all have their unique just time frames of life. Like it's just really cool to see what it's like to be from 4 to 9 and from 10 to 15 and 16 and up. And it's so very cool. I just enjoy it. And especially the younger ones, like they're just so innocent and they just want to please their parents and do the things and just have fun. I mean, it's pretty cool.
And that's why you're perfectly in the expertise in this, because you have such a wide range of the parenting things that you've come across through the last couple of years and through those ages, and to know how to apply. And the perfect person for us to be talking about a topic like this. But not only that, Dan and his wife are also leading a parenting seminar that we have going on at DCC.
Yeah.
That started last Sunday, right? And
Yeah.
there's a break coming this week, but then there's 3 more weeks coming. So there's still time to join that class.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if you only make one of those, I mean, we're going to have different strategies pretty much every session that we talk. So definitely come and join. Absolutely.
Yeah. I sent my wife. No.
Yeah, she came last week. Yeah.
She did. I was supposed to be there. I'll be there next time.
So let's dive into the topic, because we know we are in a time crunch here. We have so much to talk about when it comes to parenting, and you know, like we've been saying, nobody better than you to be able to maybe help some parents out, help us out as parents on just understand a few things about parenting and kids' brain and kids' mind, and just some importance on. Let's focus on parenting right now. I want to start with this question, and then maybe leads into whatever, right? Sure. What is the ultimate goal for parenting? Like, I think one of the things that I have struggled as a dad is to figure out, like, man, what am I doing here? What am I supposed to be doing with these kids? Like, you know, nobody ever taught me how to be a parent. Like, I learned most of my parenting by how my parents behaved around me.
I think we kind of pick up from other people. Like we say, hey, that I saw some parent, a dad did that with his kid, and like, hey, that's cool. I want to do that with mine. So we implement that. Obviously, not the bad things, because we see things we're like, oh, I would never do that. So I think it's like a combination of things that you draw from your experiences, what you've seen, what you've experienced from your own parents, and you say, okay, here are all the things that it's going to look like, and then here's the things I'm going to implement in my parenting style. And you kind of learn as you go, what to do, what not to do. You talk about me being a new parent again, like what I was doing back then with Nate, I can't even do with Zachariah now because, times change and you have to address things that way. But
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I like the name of our series itself is relationships. And I think ultimately we don't always look at our parenting as a relationship, which is interesting. We think of it as like I'm mentoring, I'm a leader, I'm guiding, and whatever the words are that we want to say. But it's a relationship that we're fostering ultimately from the very, very beginning. And I think that I've seen my wife with our youngest two. That's exactly what she's been doing since they were born, is that connection, that intimacy, that time together, just having fun together, but also like sharing the hard moments together when emotions are getting a little bit crazy or just kind of moving around on us.
So it's not a professional kind of relationship that you have with your kid because you're raising your kid to become somebody, right? Like, isn't that more or less how we see it? Is the ultimate goal of parenting creating good citizens? Is it good emotional kids, or is there one or two things that you're like, what, you'll be a successful parent if you can accomplish these 2 or 3 things?
Yeah. No, I think through the lens of relationship, I think you're looking to there are definitely some attributes of building that relationship, but ultimately you're looking to empower them to make decisions, to trust God, to move forward in building more relationships. That's what we're here for. We're here for relationships. So if our kids can do that, can they seek out healthy friendships and healthy relationships? But there's definitely some things that we can do on that journey. And just thinking about a few key words that came to mind as we were kind of thinking about this podcast, which is how are we validating our kids? That's such a key component to how we see them and how we work with them, how we set boundaries with them, and then kind of like expectations. Like, should we have expectations for our kids, and how does that look? How do you build it from the very beginning? So.
it's very interesting you say relationship because I was sitting there thinking and I was like, man, that is so true because a lot of times we look at our parenting as a one-way street, right? Like, it's my way or the highway.
Yep.
I've even said that myself. But when you think of it as a relationship, there's a give and take with that. There's 2 sides to that, right? Not saying that, there's also ultimately a responsibility you have as the adult to be like, not in charge of it, but know what's right. But there has to be give and take to, like you said, fostering a relationship. And I think that's key because I think when you see it as a relationship, I think you start thinking about your approach differently versus like as like I'm an authoritarian. Like, I'm going to tell you how it's done, and this is how it's going to be done, and you have no say in it. I'm not saying that our kids get to negotiate. I'm saying the perspective change just by thinking of it as a relationship. Because any relationship we're in, we're trying to make that better. We're trying to help improve it. Right. And it should be the same when we think of our parenting style as well. Yeah. So that's very key that it's timely how God brings all that stuff together.
Yeah, and I think that most of us parents don't think about parenting as a relationship. You're right. Mainly the reason why is because we're so preoccupied of raising kids in the right way. Right, we're so preoccupied with the right plan, the right antidote, the right strategy, the right guiding methods, the right approach to things, so that you don't mess the kids up. Right? I think a lot of us are like, I can't mess this up. Those who are more intentional, because there are parents who doesn't really care about what's going on. But for people who are more intentional, they don't see it as a relational thing. It's more of a transaction thing, a transaction, right? Where I tell you what to do and you do it because I know what is best for you, which you were saying. Yeah. So like, there's no place for that. Isn't that more or less how God treats us?
Yeah, no, I think he's definitely, actually that came to mind as well when we're thinking about relationship. And, he could easily have created a trillion robots down here, but he chose to be like, you know what, I want to actually real relationship with the ones I created. So that I agree with that 100%. He gave us the perfect example.
Because I think I would say, the ultimate example of parent would be God the Father, but then we roll into another all kind of other stuff over there. But yeah. So I had another question. What is the biblical call for parents? I mean, if this is a Christian context. This is like everything we say and do must be done through the biblical perspective, through a biblical worldview. So, I mean, is the role of the parent, the parent is to just to make sure there's a good citizen, or there's more to that? What would you say as a counselor? What is the biblical call for us parents?
Yeah, I mean, I look at like just Proverbs 22:6, which says, "Start your children off in their way they should go, and even when they are old, they will return from it." And I think about, what does it mean to start our children on that way? And that is biblical. That is bringing them to church, talking about it at home. It's like constant communication about our God and how good He is and what He does for us and just the life that we need to live with Him and for Him. So I think there's definitely a calling to, number one, I think, make sure that they understand that we do have a Creator, and that that needs to be instilled at a very early age. And I have very few kids that I've worked with that ever question that at 4 and 5 and 6 years old. Like it's like they kind of expect that's the way it is. They don't like, oh yeah, I can, I think that, this evolution thing kind of produced me. They're like, it makes perfect sense to them that there's a God and that we were created. So I think that's part of our calling as parents, is to make sure.
So let me ask you, I'm sure you counsel kids who are Christian from a Christian background, and you counsel kids who are not from a Christian background. Yeah. Can you tell a difference between in approach to things, an emotional domain, or maybe even on the behavioral domain, that you're like, wow, yeah, being a Christian kid or growing up with a Christian perspective or worldview does matter, even at this young age? Have you encountered something like that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Is that noticeable?
Yeah, I believe it is, in the sense of when we don't have, I guess, the boundaries of faith and understanding that God exists, then it's kind of wide open to interpretation for kids, and they will gravitate toward what's easy and tangible, which could be like in today's society, like electronics, right, and social media or video games or whatever the case may be. Like, those are tangible things that they can create a world in, and they can kind of dive into and be all encompassed in that. And that's where I see a lot of non-Christian kids kind of jump into, and just kids who aren't brought up in the faith, or even have very minimal amount of faith understanding. They kind of dive into other areas like that, versus understanding the actual creator of things and taking them into nature and actually like showing them what is actually right in front of them. So,
does that play a big role on identity though too?
Yeah.
Of the individual, the kids?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that definitely, it's interesting. I've had some conversations with adults lately about identity, and identity is kind of whatever's in front of them in the moment. So versus God being our identity, and that's kind of like our kind of foundation.
Sure.
So those that don't have that typically try to find work or school or food or electronics, something else to be that identity.
That foundation becomes almost interchangeable.
Right.
So whatever it is in that moment, right?
Absolutely.
It could be work because I'm working. If I'm school, could be sports. Anything can become that identity. And we were interestingly talking a little bit about identity and how it's like through your experiences, right? You were sharing about that.
Yeah. Well, we're having a sermon series on identity in the month of November, and we were talking about how different philosophers has come up with different perspective on identity. Sartre said that you choose is who you are. You are free being, and so you got to do that. Another philosopher, Heidelberg or something like that, said your experiences, your environment dictates your identity, which is both of them different philosophical aspect to understand identity in the world, which you see in play today, right? And then, but they differ completely from a biblical perspective on what the biblical teaching on our identity, who we are. It starts with Genesis 1. We are created, and then if we're created, we were intended. If we're intended, then we are loved, and if you're loved, then the trickle down effect comes from that. And understanding having an identity through that perspective, I think, is a lot better than the perspective on identity where you can choose to be whoever you want, because that's what Sartre said that hundreds of years ago, and people today is very apparent. Like, people are doing that. It's a philosophical way of approaching, a naturalistic way of approaching identity. The same thing with Heidelberg, like, allows your environment to dictate who you are. I mean, we see that all the time. Kids, not kids, only kids, adult individuals. Let's just put individuals on right now, is just so focused on who they are with and around, and they want to mold to that. And so that has caused us a lot of trouble.
Yeah. And it can even be difficult when you are teaching your kids on God and you don't necessarily have a relationship with them, with the kids. Then they can put God there, but they don't really know why. Right, so you have people who ultimately will leave the church or never come to church later on in life because they never really they never had that relationship to explain it, to understand it, to grow in it, to create that relationship with God. So then you've got this identity crisis. Like, should I choose this path that my parents, basically forced me to go and didn't really explain why, or kind of talk to me about it, or do I start looking at all these other fun, amusing, interesting paths that are just a variety of colors and styles? Like, ooh, I can kind of pick, I can make my own, right? I mean, who wouldn't want to choose their own, right? I mean,
you're right.
You can go online to Nike's website and you can create your own shoes. Like, who would want to make their own color shoes?
Don't be telling Danny that.
Well, I think that's where the concept of the relationship comes in, what we talked about earlier, right? Because I think when you have that, when you do those things with your kids, there's an explanation as to why we're doing this, why this is important to mom and dad, why this is not important to mom and dad. And because you have to also have that too as well. But what has happened is the pendulum has either swung so far the other way. We've gone extreme, right? Because we've seen, like, where people make their kids like their God, in a sense, like that. And that's a problem too when it comes to parenting. So when, maybe kind of keeping the topic going here, talking about parenting styles, right? And what do you do when you both parents have different parenting styles? How do you navigate that?
Yeah. No, I think that
You tell your wife, back off.
I think you, number one, need to know what maybe some styles of parenting are that you have grown to know, and maybe, like you said, you've maybe have meshed together a few different styles of parenting. And now,
is there such a thing, a style of parenting?
Yeah, I mean,
people are not just flying by the seat of their pants. Is there really like a parenting plan? Like, I never heard of a parenting plan. This is the parenting plan.
I know. Yeah, it's actually a concept that I started to consider when I first started counseling, because I kind of came to that realization that parents aren't talking about how they learned how to parent, to learn how to be a parent from their parents. They just kind of like mish this thing together, max it, like it's kind of craziness.
It's a melting pot of all these ideas that we've learned.
I said, why don't you guys sit down? And I actually kind of created a document that had questions to ask each other. How would you handle this situation? How would you handle that situation? What, even like when kids are small, or even before people even have kids, to let them start to think about, one of the biggest questions is, should we spank our kids, or should we do a timeout? Or, it's always about the consequences that might be different.
Sure.
But ultimately, do we want to even bring them to church? Do we want to go to church, right? So there's it's such a variety of questions. So if you were to sit down and start to write out, what do we want to plan for our kids? We were actually just talking in our class just 2 days ago, and my wife brought up the idea that our kids are the only thing that potentially we could bring to heaven with us.
Okay.
So should we be spending that much time with our kids, or should we be spending more time with our phones and our work life and things like that? So, right? None of these things are going to come with us. right?
That's interesting. I never heard that.
I,
That's
she
good.
brought- I
So
know.
yeah, so well, your kids might be one of the only things you might be able to bring with you to heaven.
right?
That's interesting. I never thought of that. Do I want them in heaven though? I'm joking.
Depends on which version.
Do we still have to parent them in heaven?
Oh,
Well, so, and I think that's one of the biggest disservice society has given to us. Then is the fact that nobody has ever taught us the styles and which styles. I'm being honest here. I don't think I have ever read a book on the parenting style. I've read a book on how to raise boys. I have read a book on how to raise girls, and I know you probably can go to the authors of that. But I have never. I read one book was like raising boys to be boys or let boys be boys, something like that. Mm-hmm. It's a blue cover with the white. I don't remember the author, but yeah, I mean they just want to embrace the personality of manhood and then unleash that into a kid. And the same thing for a girl. Just have that princess identity and then unleash that on her. And so you bring flowers to her, you take her on a date, and you appreciate her and you compliment her. The boys is like, let them throw a rock, take them hunting or whatever, But that's not parenting.
no.
That's activities to do with your kids.
Right. That's the fun stuff.
Yeah.
That's the fun stuff, yeah. So that's and we don't necessarily engage in the hard stuff, which is, hey, when you're having a temper tantrum, you got home from middle school and some kids treated you poorly today, like those are the actual moments that are going to shape your kids and build that relationship. Going out to get a Frosty at Wendy's or something like that, that's fun and nice, and that's what we like to do because that's easy for us as parents. Sure. But the hard stuff is the most productive stuff, which is I'm going to actually talk to you when you are angry, when you are sad, when you are grieving a loss of a friendship. Those are the moments that are probably the most valuable in most relationship building overall.
And I think that's where intentionality comes in, right? I think as a parent, we talk about, you said a lot of activities that we do, but as a parent is recognizing that there is a moment that my kid is going through something and being intentional of wanting to kind of work through that, because I think that's where I see the intentionality of parenting comes in, and being able to kind of have those things to teach them lifelong lessons to kind of not only in that moment, but when it pops up again, right?
Right.
Because I think the Proverbs verse is an interesting verse because it says, the one you pick, it says start them off, right? It doesn't mean you have to finish it for them. You have to start them on that path. And I think a lot of times parents have failed to start that path. And, when the Bible gives us a promise that, when they raise up, they won't turn away from it. If they have nothing that they've started on, there's nothing to turn away from.
Right.
So, how do you parent with the intentionality to do that? And I think that what you're talking about is very interesting because navigating those things is very critical for kids to learn how to do that. Even adults, we need to learn how to navigate some of those things too as well, like dealing with friendship and loss of a friend. That's key because for them in that moment, that's their world, right? And their world is just exploded. It's just shattered. Yep. How am I going to parent you through this? How am I going to walk you through this and not just get you to the other side? Because as parents, we kind of know what the other side looks like. You're going to create new friends. You're not going to lose that friend. Moved away. You're not going to, but kids in their mind, it's like, it's their world and their world is shattered. And how do you now come and pick up the pieces and say, hey, it's going to be okay? Yeah. I think that's the key thing. And I think when we talk about parenting styles, I think that's what you're saying. There has to be a way where like something happens, here's how we're going to approach it, right? Mom and dad knows this how we approach it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've had parents when I sometimes I'll do a parent session after I've met with the child a couple times in counseling, and I'll sit down with them and I'll talk to them about like emotion regulation. And I've had parents legitimately tell me yeah, I would love to be able to help regulate their emotions, but I can't do that myself.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm like, okay, well, I guess that's where we need to start with parenting is self-regulation, self-understanding, self-awareness. Because if parents don't have that, what are we parenting with? We're parenting with scissors. We're parenting with knives, running it like, hey, this sounds fun. I'm gonna walk around with these scissors in my hand, right? And it's dangerous.
A great example of that a couple of months ago, was that, I saw a kid yelling at another kid, and then the mom of the kid came yelling, and I'm like, okay, she can regulate her yelling. The kid learned his yelling or her yelling, and then is now yelling at somebody else about it.
Yep.
And I think that you are right about that. A lot of us pass on our, should I say this way, our sins into our kids. I don't know if traits. Yeah. So he's want to be like more nice. Traits are traits into our kids. And the reason why I say sin, because like there is a misconception in my point of view. We can talk about this here in the Bible when it comes to generational curses. People say that a lot of people attribute generational curses to like a spiritual thing, like, oh, you messed up and God's gonna punish you for 3 or 4 generations. I don't think that's what's going on there. What God is saying is this: if you are a yeller at home, and your kid learns from your yelling, he will continue to yell to his kids, and they're gonna be yelling for 4 kids down the road. So we can break those behavior odds. So like if addiction is a great example of that, right? Kids learn from parents addicted behaviors and moves on into that. There's many to be said. So. If parents can regulate themselves, does not behave well themselves, don't model that behavior, then the kids is going to do that, whatever they're going to do.
Yeah. It's very unfortunate, because that is definitely, it does pass down from generation to generation, any of these habits. Like you said, I've kind of given the idea that, when we do 10% better than our parents did, we call that success. And we're like, but then our kids are going to do 10% better and then 10% better. So when do we get 100% better? Like when does that happen? Or at least 80% better than what our parents did? Because our parents, we're here, we survived. But if survival is the ultimate goal, then.
Well, that's the thing. Like, what is the goal of parenting, right? Like, is just to make sure that the kid, like junior 18, you have an older kid too. It's like, is it sending them to college and washing your hands and be done with it? Is that the goal of it? Like, get them to get out of the house and go to college? Is that the success? Were we successful because they are doing that, or there's something beyond that? Like, and I think that's where some of the words you're talking about, some parenting plans and the words you're bringing about earlier, like validation and empathy and boundaries and expectations. I think that's probably something that plays into becoming the kind of parent that will make kids that not only survive but thrive. Yeah. Can you elaborate a little bit more on those words, validation and so on and so forth?
Yeah. I think I have realized, especially in the last couple of years, that we, as in just generally speaking, grew up in invalidating homes. The phrase that I hear with adults especially is, just pick up your bootstraps and just deal with it, right? Just kind of like move forward. Like, what's a kid supposed to do with that? Like, I don't have bootstraps, number one. Number two, how do I just move past this internal thing, that this alarm system that's going off inside of me? How do I turn that off? And avoiding it, just kind of like hoping it'll turn off someday. I mean, if you've ever been in a house where an alarm goes off, you have to literally put a code in to turn it off. What's the code that we need to turn off these emotions to kind of like settle them down? And a lot of times we as parents are trying to go in at a logical avenue towards an illogical emotional side of the kid's brain. And we're trying to kind of like angle at them with this logic that the kids don't, in that moment, they can't even get to that part of their brain, right? And that's a lot of what we're teaching in this class, and in the parenting class, is a lot about how to connect to that emotional side of the brain. And so validation is a very easy way to continue to do that. So there's going through some training, dialectical behavior therapy is what I use a lot in my counseling. And one of the things that they use is there's an acronym for validate. So the V is for value others. So value others, but also how do we value ourselves, right? And then the A is asking questions. Are we good at asking open-ended, detailed, like, hey, what is, not just how was school today? It was great.
Sure.
Right. Asking more details. What was the highlight for your day? What is, how would you describe your day, right? So getting them to asking kids more questions. And then the L is to listen and reflect, right? So I'm not just like listening to respond. I'm actually listening to take it in, to actually understand what happened. And then I actually will say some of that back to you just to make sure I understand that's the reflection piece of like, I heard what you said and I want to make sure that I got it. And that'll help any misconceptions or misunderstandings right then and there before it gets added on to the next misunderstanding or assumption, right? Just because a kid doesn't say something, you can't assume that all the details around the situation. We need to actually hear the words and actually get them to converse with us to find out more details. There's more letters to the validate, but
Sure.
I tell a lot of my clients, especially start with those first three to value your kids, ask good questions, open-ended questions, and listen and reflect. If you can do that, it's going to open your kids up. Like that's the natural language of us humans, but we tend to, because we haven't heard those types of things our entire life, we go back to the old stuff because it's just what we know.
But I have a problem with the word validation, though, because the meaning, as a second language guy, English as my second language, the word validation means to approve.
Yeah, and there's
Right, like, so what? It's not that I don't like it. I'm saying, like, when I hear the word validation, I mean, like, approve. How am I going to validate my kid on his emotional misbehaving? How do you validate someone while disciplining them, while guiding them? How do you get the balance between letting your kid be who she or he wants to be because they're making those decisions, and at the same time support, validate their growth and maturity and the processes that it needs to happen in their lives for them to become the being that God has for them?
Well, it's a true statement that their emotions are real in that moment, right? So if I choose to not accept those emotions, which unfortunately a lot of parents do, like, well, you must have some kind of, if they're acting up, they must have some preconceived notion in their minds. They're planning out some deceivious plan against me as a parent to try to mess up my world right now. Like, that's not what kids are doing.
Parents think that?
But think about it. Like, that's kind of what that's kind of what we're talking about. Like, we're thinking in our logical mind that this tantrum, this call for help, has got to be some manipulative plan by this 5-year-old, and we're like, that's not what they're doing. They're upset.
Yeah.
They're upset.
Yeah.
Why are they upset is the question that should be running through our mind, and we should try to understand that block that they wanted, that their brother just took from them, is a big deal. That's a big deal. To us as an adult, like robbing, stealing, killing, that's a big deal, right? But that kid just lost a block to his brother. That just got stolen by another person
Yeah, he's mad.
that I should be trusting. And now I'm upset about that. Right. So we can look at it two different ways. We're like, be quiet, deal with it, or take it back from them, beat them up and take it back. Or we can just say, oh,
Man, that's so true.
That's
because-
crazy.
No, listen. This is so true because
That's
so
crazy.
so listen. So this is so true because so last night we're babysitting.
I
kids.
spanked my kids, just so you know, every time.
Give the block back.
It is
this is the time I should put in
You
my...
just talk the other kid. You both got a spanking for being taking things from each other.
So now Sam also is upset now. So we have 3 people in the room that are upset, not just 2 anymore.
No, but I want to make an observation because what you said is so true because we see that play out all the time. Like for example, like last night, it's not a big issue, but last night we were babysitting kids for the other seminar that was happening, and we had a bunch of kids in there. We have littles, right? So my son is a little kid, so like he's an only child, kind of, because we have another kid, but he's 20, right? So when he's at home, he's just playing by himself. Well, so last night he was here. We brought him with us, and he was playing with someone, and someone had a toy. I forget what it was, and so he wanted it. So he went and took it. So I'm like, my wife is very on top of it, right? She's like, nope, you give that back, and she makes him go and give it back, right? But then there's other times where it wasn't like maybe it's not your kid, and you see a kid like take a toy from someone. And you say, I don't want to deal with it. So like, hey, you can play with it for a little bit. He'll give it up, and a little bit you get it back, right? So that situation right there, based on what you're saying, is like that kid is really experiencing a trauma. Like, hey, your kid took this thing from me. Like, how you deal with that? And I think So those connections starts forming right then and there, because Zachariah is only 18 months, right? Of like, oh, this happened, like.
So what did your wife do? She created a boundary,
Yes,
and an expectation.
But wait. We live on planet Earth, and the winners take stuff.
Oh, you're talking about like the animals in the kingdom, and like
Yeah.
how,
Isn't
like,
that- but
like
isn't-
the little
isn't-
baby
well,
sheep that gets eaten by a lion, kind of thing.
Well,
Right.
that's
Are we,
that,
is that where we're at? Is that
well,
where we're
but
at?
isn't that but isn't that how isn't that how the system in the world
Is that
works?
how
So
evolution works? Sure.
if, if you want to win, you better
Strongest
be
will survive.
That's
Yeah.
exactly it.
Sure.
But that's exactly how we are taught. We're taught that in schools. We're taught that on TV. We're taught that through technology. Like only the best will survive. The best ones, how do you find them? They're taking stuff from other people.
Yeah. Sad, isn't it?
It's
very sad.
Crazy.
Yeah.
I could see you're talking about little Zachariah taken away. Have seen that meme where the glasses, the Thug Life shows up and the glass comes down and then have a cigarette. It's like Thug Life. I was like, yeah, that's my boy right here.
because he was like, "What? Take it back." But the one thing that we try to do, and not that we haven't figured out, is be consistent. Like the one thing that is annoying annoying at home, right? He like just throws something, but he throws it. And my wife said, "Hey, don't throw it. I go pick it up." I'm like, "It's fine. It's on the ground. We'll pick." She gets up and she makes him, like she drags him, like pick it up, like physically grab it, pick it up, and she's consistent in that. Whereas me, I'm a little lazy. I'm like, I don't want to get up the couch. Yep. I just want to be like, it's just a little block. I told him not to throw it. He threw it. It's fine. But you're saying like those are moments that we need to take, and we need to be intentional in those moments, because those are the moments, if we don't kind of correct or autocorrect now, can become an issue for down the road, because he had felt like I didn't have to do that, because you telling me to do something now, but now you're being inconsistent. So consistency is also important when it comes to parenting style.
Yes.
Well, and he said a word that I never thought of it. Like when you're disciplining your kid, you're creating boundaries.
Yeah. Yeah. I can't tell you. That's like probably in counseling, that's probably the number 2 or 3 area I talk about is boundaries. And almost every single time we bring it up, it is a bad thing. Boundaries are bad. That's all we learned as kids, right? Well, and there are loving boundaries. They're like boundaries are absolutely. And like the example that Cloud and Townsend use in boundaries is that like God created a skin that we have as a boundary to keep all of our insides inside, right? Imagine if you don't have skin. You're your intestines are gonna fall out. You're gonna be walking around with your intestines hanging out. That's not cool, right? So we have skin to keep everything inside. So God is a God of boundaries. I mean, very distinctive. God, Jesus, the Holy Spirit, boundaries, right? You see it
Heaven,
everywhere,
earth,
right? Continuous boundaries, right? So God, we just have to treat them as they are. Like they're not always fun, but they're important. They're important. And that starts at a very young age, is teaching them those boundaries.
I think it was Carrie or you told me this one time. Boundaries are not walls, they're gates.
Yep. They're like a fence with a gate. Yeah.
Where, you allow some things in, some things out, and, they're fluid in a sense, because as you grow, boundaries change. As you mature, as you're emotionally stronger, some boundaries can be lifted. And if you're weak, and you got to keep more boundaries up. So boundaries are important. Adjusting your boundaries in the kids they are growing though. Like, when they're young, we got a lot. It's like you're saying, you're telling the kid, go give the thing back. It's the boundaries you're creating there. How can we effectively do that when they're growing up though? I think one of the biggest problems I see from parents is that they at times create too many boundaries in order to protect the kid even.
Yeah.
So how do we move from creating healthy boundaries to like, okay, now it's time for you to stop with the boundaries, let your kids start picking on that up?
Yeah. There's a resource I use and I wish I had this early when I had my older 2 kids are 17 and 20, and I wish I'd had this book when they were probably like 5, and I didn't get until they were probably like later in their life, but then I had to kind of backtrack a little bit. But it's called Parenting with Love and Logic. And love and logic it teaches responsibility. And responsibility is a version of boundaries. Like
Sure.
I have particular responsibilities I need to do. That's my boundary. So a lot of times it says, giving kids 2 options instead of no options, or just 1 option, right? This is the only option that you have. The kids are going to probably fight you back a little bit.
Sure.
But if you give them 2 options, and those are the only 2 options, and you stick with those 2 options, kids are going to like, okay, sounds good. Those are my 2 options.
I get to choose one.
Right. Another one is like, but there's also the circumstance where, when they're younger, treating those boundaries as letting them try some things and learn from them and have a conversation about what they learned about it. So like for a good example is, and I'm sure every parent's run into this, where like the kid wants to not wear a coat outside and it's December, right? Or January, right? No, you have to wear a coat. No, you have to wear a coat. No, you have to wear a coat. That's what parents do, right? What if you just let the kid go outside, recognize it's cold outside, it's snowing, I'm cold, my arms are cold, I'm about to get frostbite, I'm going to run back in and get a coat, put the coat on and go back outside. They just learned a boundary and a responsible thing that they had to learn and connect themselves. The more that they connect themselves, the longer term they're going to be in their memory. If we just continue to badger them, those don't stay in the memory. They will come and they will go.
So you're saying allowing kids to organically learn few things anyways?
When they're younger especially, because what's going to happen when they turn 16? We're going to give them a car that's several thousand pounds that can drive and potentially kill somebody. So you have a very short amount of time between birth to 12, 13, 14 to get these responsibilities and boundaries in place so that when they are 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20 and above, they are taking responsibility for themselves and for the lives around them as well, as the relationships they have in their life as well. Because
so are you saying that when parents are making decisions for your kids, you're actually inhibiting them from growing and maturing and able in the future to create the ability within their mind and heart to make decisions pertaining to whatever?
Yeah. And they're more apt to do that if they've been validated, given expectations and boundaries on that journey. So I'm allowing them to share their emotions. We're having this, again, back to the beginning, the relationship I have with them is developing this well-rounded child. And as I'm validating their emotional states, they're recognizing how to manage their emotions and regulate them. And so with regulated emotions, with boundaries and expectations and responsibility, they're going to make some pretty cool decisions when they turn 16 that are like, yeah, my friend was playing music too loud and I told him to turn it down because I couldn't concentrate on the road. Instead of like, hey, jack that music up and let's listen to it and let's open the windows, and all of a sudden, crash, they hit somebody, right? So we want to help them on that journey, learn from those mistakes, or just like, again, why they choose to do something, like critical thinking skills. Is kind of an outcome of that.
So what age would you say is a good time to start? Because I'm thinking right now, if I let Zachariah go outside, he's going to be frozen to death like a snowman out there, right? So I think there has to be some sense of like,
right.
You got to know if your kid is like, you have to know your kid, and you have to know that time too, right?
And most kids that are going to go out there without a coat on are usually going to be like 3 and 4 years old, maybe 5. So I think it's okay at that age to start that process. From birth to like 2, you probably just need to bundle them up and put them out.
Yeah.
And they're not trying to necessarily take the lead role at that point. Yeah. But when they start to get into what they call like the terrible 2, 3, 4, right? They start to like know everything. They say no and they know everything. So it's important at that point to really start to like, okay, let's see how let's just do an experiment and see how that's going to turn out.
Yeah. An example of that what we know that we couldn't do that because it was raining, and he loves to be outside. And all of a sudden it's raining in Ohio. And he's like, what in the world, man? You're cramping my style. It hasn't rained for like the year. But he wants to go outside. So I found that redirecting was important, right? Now, I didn't validate.
To the shower?
Well, I didn't validate that he wanted to go outside, let him go outside. I'm just kind of playing along here.
Yeah.
But I redirected him to do something else, and he kind of forgot about it. Like, in that moment, did I hurt him in that way by not validating his need to want to go outside or trying to?
I mean, you could say like, hey man, I'm as excited as you are to go play in the rain and get my feet wet, right? Even if you're not necessarily like that excited about it, you're reading his emotions and you're like validating like how excited he is, and like once you've made that connection, now you can redirect even easier. Like connect and then redirect to a different spot.
So we gotta learn how to redirect, because I didn't redirect right. I said, "You want a cookie?"
That's smart.
Well, it's interesting because on Sunday when we were teaching that in the book that we're teaching with, it talks about like this little boy, like 2 or 3 years old, goes through like a big traumatic event, and there's the mom shows up. He was with the babysitter. The mom shows up, and you can do one of two things. I can talk with them and work through the traumatic stuff and talk about it and talk about it and talk about it, or we can say, "Hey, let's go get ice cream."
Yeah.
And so, right, the let's go get ice cream parenting is fun, right? I like ice cream. I mean, why wouldn't I want to go get ice cream? But it's not helping the kid actually process what just happened. It's ignoring it because it is a difficult emotional thing for both of us.
But they're kids. They're not supposed to be processing all these emotional things. Like, they're not supposed to be processing whatever. I mean, a frustration, or the fact that someone stole something from you, or even the mom and dad is fighting in front of you, or whatever that might be. Right? There is this kind of self-protecting. The Superman, I like to say the Superman idea, the superhero idea from parents to protect their kids from processing some of these very important things that are not good necessarily, in our perspective, not good, but essential for their critical thinking, essential for conflict resolution, essential for decision-making abilities that will pay great dividends in the end.
It's like the perfect example of a kid never sees mom and dad fight, doesn't know how to resolve when there's differences of opinion, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, that happens frequently, unfortunately.
You know what you were saying before was another word you brought it up was the word expectations. Isn't that? Don't we have some kind of like problems with the word expectation? I would say the biggest problem I personally have is adjusting my parental expectations to my kids' abilities.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, I can give you so many examples of what I expect one of my kids to do and how I want them to do it and how I obligate them to do it, but they don't have the ability quite yet to do it that way. And I don't budge. I'm like, no, that's what you gotta get it, and this is what we're gonna do, and this is what you're doing right now. How do we adjust that? How does parents because we all have expectations for kids, and we should have expectations. I'm assuming you're going to say you should have some expectation for your kids.
Well, I say that.
I'm assuming.
I say that with the idea that I have a relationship with them first. It's much easier to lay an expectation down.
So you're saying the validation, expectation, all this stuff,
like
boundaries doesn't work if you don't have a good relationship with the kid.
That's where it all begins. Right? It's your own self-awareness, then having a relationship with them, then all of these things are kind of kids. Working in retail for 25 years, I started setting expectations for some of my employees, and you would think they would have fought it, but they enjoyed it because they knew. It's like you're driving down the highway looking for the speed limit sign and nowhere to be found. What's the expectation?
Yeah.
Right? So same thing. Like, what's the expectation in your home with your kids needs to be the speed limit sign of which, the expectation for how much time they have on screens, how much homework they should be getting done, how much time they should have with their friends. These all should be expectations at a very young age as they build, and they should adjust over time, right? They should adjust as they get into different developmental stages.
I understand that. I'm going to push back a little bit here.
Yeah.
Doesn't expectation, the reason why you're looking for the 75 miles an hour speed limit because you're afraid of the cop, not because you were necessarily wanting to know what was expected from you? Because I think sometimes expectations comes with the idea that there'll be a cop in the corner, and if you don't do it as expected, you're gonna get it.
What is the ultimate purpose of staying within that 75 miles per hour? Is it because someone just said this person's going to be there, or is it because we want you to be safe?
Sure.
and secure and not hit a tree at 99 miles an hour, right? So the idea behind it is to keep them within a specific realm to keep them safe. And if our relationship, we can't have a relationship without wanting the best interests of the other person. Right?
Agreed, yeah.
Like, that's not a relationship if you don't want the best interest for them. So our best interest for our kids is to keep them safe. And they don't have a fully developed brain. So that's where expectations come in, saying, you know what, I know that if you do this, chances are that's probably going to happen. I don't have to go through all the, we like to say, well, when I was a kid, right? They don't care, right? But if there's just a straight expectation, you don't have to go into the whole dialogue and who did this and where did that happen and when I ran over. Like, don't worry about any of that stuff. Like, it's too much. They're going to fall asleep 30 seconds into your speech with them. Just set the expectation, and that's we all know that's to keep them safe, to keep you safe. And if they want to know more, let's talk about more. Like, what does that look like?
So you're not go. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was going to say, so you don't go put in the expectation explaining, listen, it's 75 miles an hour because it's going to keep you safe. Or you just say 75 miles an hour, that's it.
I mean, you can do both. And if you have that group of kids, like half the population of kids are going to be like, yep, no problem. Thanks, mom and dad. Appreciate the expectation, the limit, right? Yeah. Then you have the other half of the kids that are like, no, I need to know why. And for that specific kid, maybe I'll have that conversation with them. But it won't be about necessarily my experiences with it. We can talk through what's going to potentially happen if we go past that level. Like, what is that? If you really want to know, let's talk about that. What else? What else? And we brainstorm together in this relationship what potentially could happen. Instead of me just being the dictator, I'm encouraging him to be. We're gonna talk about this together, right? What are the things that happen? I do that in my counseling classes and counseling time all together with kids. Like, this is a scenario. What are the different possible consequences that could happen? Some could be positive. Also, some could be not so positive. Could be negative. So yeah, like you said earlier, I do want to adjust that based on the kid because, like you said, some kids just have a natural like stop sign that they shouldn't go any further, and you're like, they kind of have a different like moral like. Just kind of like compass, than the other kid who just would literally go skydiving and not think about it.
So let me ask a question, because I don't have this dynamic in my household. Maybe you do, Sam, because people raising multiple kids. How do you manage that when one kid thinks the expectation is too high for them versus the other, right? And if we're talking about it with the context of the kid, right? Yeah. How do you balance that when?
I hear it there's all the time. Oh, you didn't say that to June when he was at home, or that was not the expectation for Junior.
So how do you handle it?
Yeah.
I was like, shut up, kid. No, I'm just joking.
Well, and we have to just admit, like, we are learning. Like, with my 4 kids, I've learned a ton from my 20-year-old now to my 10-year-old. And I'm happy to say, hey, I didn't have that expectation for the 20-year-old at that time because I just didn't know.
You didn't know, yeah.
I didn't know, right? I didn't know. That's why the last kid, like myself, turns out so great, right? Because
you have learned all of
it.
Right.
I've learned. In my
you ruined the first, the second, the third to make the fourth better.
Or the opposite sometimes happens where the parents are just so tired by the 3rd or 4th or 5th or 6th or 10th kid that they're like, just whatever. Right, they started with really great expectations, and by the time they got to the 10th kid, it's kind of like,
do whatever.
Well, you're not going to die. I'm pretty confident. I'm pretty confident
you're
not going to die.
You're talking about something that is a problem for me. I just had a conversation with someone the other day. They're like, yeah, my last kid is like, whatever. He does whatever because if all the other ones survive, this one is going to be just fine. And I was like, that's intentionally parenting a kid. It's a problem that I see in the church. It's a problem that I see in the soccer field. It's a problem that I see everywhere in our society. It's like, you know what? I took care of my first 2-3 kids, and that was enough. Like, this last one do his own thing or whatever. I feel bad because the first one didn't turn out the way I wanted. The second one was almost there, but not quite there. So, there's all these dynamics in people's mind. There's a problem, I think. But
Yeah, and it is important to learn from previous kids, but I'm hoping that it increases your level of knowledge and self-awareness so you can parent even better, not less. Not less parenting, better parenting. Because again, we go back to the beginning, like if we're all believers here and our kids are going to go with us to heaven, like that's a real thing, Like you let them go the way they're going to go, and you read you tell me in the book of Proverbs how many times does it say the fool will ... every single time, right? So we do need to give them boundaries and expectations, no matter the age, no matter, like, there are versions at 2 and there's versions at 18, and so, but again, I can't stress enough the first two things, like my relationship with them and my own personal self-awareness. Like, if I'm feeling too tired, too worn out, too emotionally discharged to interact with my kids, I need to figure that out. I need to get some help. I need to get some support. I need to make sure I have, like, a family should not be alone on its own, right? It should have community around them. If that community is friends, if it's family, if it's the church. Like, I moved here 20 plus years ago, 0 family in the state of Ohio. My family is the church. That's who I've relied on for over 20 years now. So it's a legit thing. Like, we need to get that in our minds, that if we have I've been in a small group ever since I started here. Whatever group I've been in for the last 20 years, different groups, different families, different situations, they've been my family. So we need to have support around us so that we don't burn out. And so we could, like, as parents, can get a babysitter and to hang out with the kids for a night so we can get a night away, things like that. I mean, we can't just burn ourselves out and expect to be the best parents possible.
So you touched on something that afflicted me in my past, on my upbringing, is community parenting, communal parenting. As a pastor's kid, the church community wants to parent you. I mean, I'm sure then you have gone through that, as into you have a kid and everybody in the church thinks like they are entitled to help me in my parenting style, which I appreciate. It was what happened to me growing up, right? I think DCC does a great job at not invading my personal private life. I think one of the things I love about being in this place is the fact that I'm given the freedom to be myself and not to be infiltrated by all the personalities that is around me, right? Sure. But that was not true for my mom and dad. Like, I got spanked by the assistant pastor's wife. I got spanked by Mary, the old lady from Sunday school. I got, there's this
name dropped.
Yeah, well, she's dead now. So Mario's her name. Mario Gomez. She spanked the heck out of me a couple of times. I deserved it.
She's in heaven waiting on you.
I deserved it. I'm not saying I didn't deserve it, but I think for a kid, though, that's as a kid who was parented by a community, especially called the church, it was defeating. Even today, it makes me mad, like, to think about the fact that, these people thought they could parent me, and then the only ones who could is my dad. Or they would parent me by telling my dad, by manipulating the situation and telling my dad so that I would get the discipline that they thought I deserved. And I think we do need a community, but I think the person that you're trying to that as part of the community, I can only parent someone's kid if my relationship with that family is strong enough and trustworthy enough, and the freedom is given for me to come and admonish that kid by saying, hey, maybe you shouldn't be doing this right now, right? Yeah. I think so many times, because of the name is the church, you do not know so-and-so, but you saw them in church and the kid is doing something, and you go there and you say, like, baby, you shouldn't be doing this. And the kid's like, what? Why are you trying to correct me? I don't even know who you are. Well, we go to the same church together. I was like, well, that's not good. Right. I think, I don't even know what I'm trying to say here. Maybe I'm looking for a therapy moment here.
What's interesting is that I was listening to another sermon once, like a podcast sermon, and this gentleman said, he's the pastor, he said that his dad was a pastor as well. So he was in church one day when he was probably 10, 12 years old with another friend of his. They snuck off during dad's preaching, went to the pizza place and hung out. And actually, because his dad's sermons were being televised, they watched it on the TV at the pizza place down the street. The secretary saw them go and decided to tell dad, the pastor, what they did. On the way home that day, he's sitting in the back seat going, I'm going to be like he's going to have a sermon. Like, we're going to have a sermon all the way home on how bad I am and things like that. And the dad says, do you know so-and-so, the secretary? He's like, yeah, I know secretary, yeah. She told me that you guys went to this pizza place. And do you know what I told her? The dad said, mind your own business. That's my son. And so I was just like, ooh, I like that. From that point on, the pastor's son became a pastor, and he was like, I knew my dad had my back no matter what.
Sure.
From that point on. That was huge. Like, that will stick with him. That was a moment of clarity for him as a son to a dad in that relationship that they could never. That was a moment. It was just that impactful. So.
Well, and I preached here DCC this before. For 2 Thessalonians, there's a verse there that Paul says, listen, you take care of your own business. Don't be looking for the business of others. And I think in the church, because it's a community, we feel like we have the freedom to be able to speak into people's lives, as it is said. Oh, let me give you a word of wisdom. Let me give you a word of encouragement. Let me prophesy over your life. Let me give you, and you feel like that people feel like they have this right to speak whatever into it just because we're part of the same community thing and the family of God and so on and so forth. And I think we need to create some boundaries there.
I think thinking of the word expectation, there's expectation that people put on your kids.
Oh, yeah.
Because of who you are or the influence you may have, and I think that's unfair to the child. And you're right. Having that moment where the dad or the mom, whomever it may be, having that kid's back, knowing like, hey, I got you no matter what, I think it's important because I think PKs, pastors' kids, do have many more parents because they feel like, because you have this unrealistic expectation because, hey, you're the pastor's kid. You shouldn't be doing that. But you don't have that expectation for your kid.
Right.
But you want to have the expectation for that kid. Why is that? It shouldn't be different, right? So they're kids, but
right. Yeah.
Well, and I don't want to throw the communal parenting out of the window because it is necessary. I mean, there are many things that I have been brought to my awareness that I would never know about my kids if someone wouldn't have the concern of coming to me and say, "Hey, Pastor Sam, I saw this or I heard this, and you better check with your kid." So that's important. Right. I don't know if the saying like raise a village. What is it? You need a village to raise a child. I'm not so sure that's true, but you definitely need a village to help you in the process of raising a child, and maybe that's what that statement is all about. So we cannot throw the communal aspect of it away.
Right, but it is important. You should, as a parent, you should do your due diligence and make sure that they have the same values, that they are going to come alongside you. And like, I've had a lot of parents come in and say, my parents are just really crappy grandparents, and I cannot trust them to have my kids' best interests in mind. So I'm going to have to cut them off for a while. And that's a hard thing to do, but it may be important for the grandparents to realize, like, that just because you're grandparents doesn't give you the right to do whatever you want with your grandkids.
And that's a key. That's a good thing, because I was gonna ask that question, right? Because we're all trying to be good parents, better parents than our parents were, right? Not saying our parents did wrong or anything, but we just want to do better, do things differently. Yeah. How do you navigate that when a grandparent comes in and totally just upheals the whole thing that you have and just goes say, no, we're not doing that, or like, I'm grandma or grandpa, I get to do this. Like, you kind of touched on it a little bit there, but how do you have that conversation as parents? Because I'm very flat out like, hey, you need to leave it alone, and they don't like that.
Oh yeah.
But like, and then that creates issues all around. Now you have an issue with you and your parents. So how should we navigate that?
Yeah. Again, it goes back to the key word, relationships, right? So relationships aren't always going to be nice flowing rivers of calmness and peace, right? There's going to be...
Were we not the Sea of Galilee?
I know, right? Might be the Red Sea when, we've got a storm coming through, right? So let's have that hard conversation with them when we are emotionally like in a good place, right? You go into that conversation, you're in upheaval, they're in upheaval, we're just going to have this, I've had people write letters to their parents just to like get it out on paper first and then have conversations about it. Like, and if the parents are stubborn and they're just very selfish about willingness to change or adapt to the parents and the children, then you may need to pause that relationship for a short term until we can get in the same understanding. But maybe there's also things for you to understand as well about the grandparent perspective. Like, is there something that you need to know as well that will help them grandparent differently?
It's a two-way street.
Right.
It's never a one-way street.
Exactly, right. But ultimately, it's easier for a grandparent to come down to the parent level than the parent to go up to the grandparent level, right? I can't ask a 12-year-old kid to act like a 40-year-old. But I can tell a 40-year-old to try to remember what it was like to be a 12-year-old because they were there once, right? I've had that conversation with 60-year-old parents and their 40-year-old kids. Like, can you asking a 40-year-old to be a 60-year-old is not feasible. Asking a 60-year-old to come down to the 40-year-old level is possible.
But I'm 60-year-old, and I know what you should be doing as a 40-year-old. I didn't do it, so I want to tell you what to do so I can make your life better.
Right. And it just invalidate me all over the place, right?
I was about to say, then goes
grab
back
that-
to the beginning where you're
grab that
invalidating
now.
what's going on.
Yeah.
Because parenting it starts at day one, but doesn't end.
Never ends.
That's the problem of parenting.
Is
And
it?
well, I mean, like the
Are you
problem.
saying you want to? Like,
I want to be off duty.
It's like
Yeah.
the problem
Call the
as into
babysitter.
like at 60 you can't. At 60 your parenting has to change
Oh, absolutely.
to your 40-year-old kid.
Absolutely.
So like, but
they are co-equals with you now.
that's right.
They're a parent just like you were.
Well, and you guys were talking about this. You have heard me talk about this before. Caleb one time at the church the first church we were at, he got a baseball, broke the window. I got I got his arm lifted up, he was spanking. My mom was at the house. Mom's like, "You do not spank my grandchild." And I looked at her, I was like, "Excuse me? If it was me back in the day, you would have killed me here." No, he's got a spanking. She's like, "No, sir." She got in the way. She's like, "No, you're not spanking my grandchild." I was like, "Mom, love you. Step aside. He will never do that again." He broke the window and he got what he deserved. It wasn't too hard. It wasn't that bad, right? But he got discipline. Can we do that? Can we tell our parents, "Listen, no, you're not gonna do that"?
It's called a boundary. Absolutely.
Like, no,
I
this
love
is my
you.
kid. This is my house. This is my life. Because I think people need that freedom. Holidays. It's a big, this. One of the biggest problems for especially newlywed people is holidays. My mom and dad wants me to come to my holidays this weekend, and the husband or the wife is like, "Oh well, I have some other plans." Like, mom and dads parents are always trying to make decisions for adult children, and I think that's a problem.
Yeah.
Because they can't let go.
Right. They have this, and it's a kind of another subject, but they have this belief in their mind that we all have to be together in order for it to be like the perfect holiday, and the belief that it can be a perfect holiday. So those beliefs have to be challenged occasionally by the kids to be like, you know what, even though that's how we want it to be, and if it could be, that would be great, but realistically, we can't do that this year. So maybe next year we can do that, or maybe at a different holiday. So that, again, there's a parenting plan, but there's also a marriage plan that we won't get into marriage counseling, but just like how do we navigate holidays with our two separate families? We got to have those conversations so early in the marriage, preferably before kids are around, because when kids get into it, it's a whole other complicated thing. Right. And if both parents want you on the same day, you're going to have to negotiate a little bit, try to figure out what's the best option this year versus next year, things like that. So
It's called 4 Christmases.
yeah.
Do it all 4.
Yeah. But the more flexible the grandparents can be to that situation, the more you're going to come up with a solution that is acceptable to all parties involved. Does Christmas have to be on Christmas Day? Does New Year's Eve have to be on, right? There's holidays, and then there's relationship time together. Is it about the holiday?
But
or
what
is it
about the
time
mom?
together?
Well, we always have a holiday together. You're gonna ruin my life.
But one of the things that I was thinking of was like, what if I want to start new traditions with my family? Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I need to have space for that. Like,
Right.
it's not always. So that's something that you have to navigate, right?
Yep.
So, I think that's important when you think about traditions and things like that. I may want to start a tradition where my family's doing that. So, but I also have to recognize that I did break a tradition at one point, and maybe enough now, but maybe 10, 20, 30 years from now when
Right.
my kids have their own family, they want to have their tradition too. And we
Right.
have to be respectful for that because the tradition started somewhere, right?
Right.
Not everybody wins in that stead, but like it's a good thing. And all these things we're not talking, they're not bad. Is like wanting to be around families is important, but I think there has to be space to allow other things to kind of start too as well. Or else you'll always be making people
So
unhappy.
you'd say once you're empty nester, your family is you and your wife? Would you say that? And then your kids have their families?
Yeah.
And if it works out that people come together, so be it, great. If not, your family is your wife and your wife? Is
Yeah.
that what you say, as people grow older?
The harder we hold on to those beliefs that our family is still like together, the more people are going to probably battle that.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're flexible a little bit more to being able to say, hey, you create your family traditions, we'll still be here for you guys. And again, if in that journey of parenting, you have wanted that relationship from day one or whatever day you decided, this is a relationship. This is not just me telling you what to do. Whenever that started, it continues on until you're no longer here, right? It does evolve as your kids evolve, but you want them to come back and seek your support. And if they want to buy their first house, come to you to talk through, like you're the trusted resource at that point. You're not just giving them just random advice that they're not asking for, but they're coming to seek you out. That's the ultimate goal, is that you've built that relationship so strong that you are the wise person they come to, the wise counsel, that you're part of that inner circle for them. I do this like map for people where I like put like multiple different circles, and in the innermost circle are the people you trust the most. Then the next circle has like 80%, then 60%, then 40%. It kind of goes out from there to like your Facebook friends. And so in the innermost circle, it's like, who are those people? Are your parents in there, or are they on a second or third circle out? Is there something keeping them on the outside, or is it because you just don't want that or don't have the room for that kind of relationship right now? So, you want to be in that innermost circle with your kids their entire life.
So you better start working today.
And that
on being
requires a lifelong, again, once you've decided to have kids, this is a lifelong endeavor. This is not like you said before, like 18, 25, 40. Yeah, it makes it harder when they move across the country, but that doesn't change. That relationship just evolved a little bit and changed a little bit, but it didn't stop.
Well, I think we come to an
Yeah, I think
come
this is
to the ending of here. But I wanted to do one exercise with you. I was going to read one Bible verse and tell me what you think about it. What was the first, in the context of parenting?
Yeah.
Like I'll read the Bible verse and maybe give me 2-3 thoughts that comes from that. Can we do that game?
Yeah, absolutely.
And you should know this. You know this verse. Ephesians 6:4. Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in discipline and instruction of the Lord. Thoughts that comes out of that. For you too, Danny. Think about it.
Yeah, I think the first thing that kind of pops in mind is the idea of boundaries. Bring them up in the Lord, and that goes back to the relationship side. Like, if my relationship with God, I want them to also have a relationship with God, whatever that may look like, right? So if I bring them up in that way, they're going to want to have that if that relationship's there and those boundaries are there.
Yeah.
Anything else?
No, I mean, for that one, I that one kind of hit me hard because that one, I struggled with anger early on in when Nate was very young. I was a young guy. I was still learning. So I didn't model the right way to deal with anger to him. So which now created that generational issue, right? Where he doesn't know how to navigate anger. Yeah. He works better. He actually has talked to counselors and he has tried to do that. So I think with that one, that was a tough one. Like, how do you... So I think for me, it's about being intentional about what I model. So now that we have Zachariah, I'm very intentional about when I blow up, because I still get angry, right? And over the time, I've matured, I've grown in that. So I think as a parent, you have to recognize what are some things, what are the demons that I have that I'm passing on to my kids, and how do I go and kind of snuff those out for the betterment of the overall relationship first and foremost, but to also create that generational thing where I'm not causing that to be carried forward.
Yeah, you're growing just as much as the kids are growing.
Yeah,
there should be equal amounts of growth happening in both of you, And it can't just be like, well, I'm just going to sit here in my chair while you grow taller and smarter, right? Like that's not. It needs to be. You need to be growing as well, and self-awareness. So yeah.
Any final thoughts, Dan? Anything?
No, I really appreciate the time, and I have a passion for parenting, but also like because a lot of times I see like people. I work with a lot of kids, but it's not the kid I'm working with; it's the family I'm working with because it's a family struggle. It's, like the kids' tantrums or struggles with electronics or whatever the case may be, right? It's a family thing, and that emotions are getting kind of all over the place. So helping the parents just as much as the kids because, the past doesn't have to dictate the future. Like just because you were part of a family that maybe didn't validate or didn't have boundaries or expectations doesn't mean that you now are just going to live in that same shadow, right? You can move out of that shadow, get a great foundation with God, put these things in place, and be the parent that God wants you to be even more than what you know how to be. So,
That's well said.
Well, if you if you're part of the Love Action Church or you listen to this podcast, you're always welcome to hit Dan out. He's a great counselor, has helped many people, from kids to adults, married, singles. I know you cover it all. You'd be in good company. I know for a fact that God has used you greatly in the life of many people here at DCC. It'll be hard to count the amount of people you have blessed, and I'm thankful for your life, for the partnership in the ministry. You're a trustworthy individual that people must to be listened to.
Yeah, Nate was Nate's counselor, so it's something that personally you've helped us navigate a lot of conversations, and I know you could help everyone else too as well. Parenting is a battle you want to fight for. It's a battle you want to engage in because we are contributing to a generation, and you want to make sure that we're doing our part to contribute to a better generation, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think it's important.
So let's end this podcast with the statement you said that your wife said on Sunday morning. What was that statement again?
The kids are the only thing that you can take to heaven with you.
Be blessed.
Be blessed.
Take care. God bless.